You're listening to the People Agenda podcast, brought to you by leading HR, workforce and payroll transformation specialist, Lace Partners. Good morning, good afternoon and good evening and welcome to the People Agenda podcast. It's me, Chris from Lace Partners. Thank you as always for joining us. And today we are going to talk all things mergers and acquisitions, M&A activity. And to do that, we're going to bring in one of our partners, one of our friends, and somebody with a bit of experience of that. I'm going to introduce him in a second. But first and foremost, I always like to have a Lacer with me, riding shotgun alongside. And today we've got Shivani from our workforce transformation team making her debut. How are you doing, Shivani? You all right?
Yeah, good, thanks. Lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you on. First of many, I'm sure. And our guest today, Andrew Philp, he's from activpayroll, and Andrew is the CFO there. Andrew, how are you doing? You all right?
I'm good, Chris. Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you on the podcast.
Yes, really good to have you on. And also maybe first of many, because we've had a couple of chats off air, if you like, where there's a couple of opportunities to dig into your experience and background. But the first one we wanted to talk about today, because you've got experience both with activpayroll in your previous roles, is on the things that HR professionals, CPOs and businesses need to be thinking about when it comes to M&A. What are the types of challenges you've come across? So we're going to dig into all of that. But before we do our fundamentally different question, which for those of you listening in for the first time is a completely random, not related to HR or payroll question, and we like to do it as a little bit of an icebreaker. We're going to get into that in a second, but I think what I'll do first is intros. Do you want to tell our wonderful listeners a little bit about yourself and your background, and then we'll get into me really testing you on our fundamentally different question?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, I'm Andrew Philp. So I'm the CFO currently at activpayroll. And I spent most of my career in finance or sort of finance transformation, restructuring. And unfortunately with activpayroll, have led the business through its own acquisitions as well. So I spent a fair bit of time before activpayroll with KPMG, where I was working in the UK and Sweden. So I was based up in the Aberdeen office with KPMG, so I spent quite a bit of time with the oil and gas companies, moving around. Aberdeen was really the strong hub for the operational oil and gas, but spent a fair bit of time with colleagues in London, and then went to Sweden, where I spent 2 years with the Swedish KPMG team. And then I got more experience broadly outside of oil and gas. And then in 2021, I was fortunate enough to then move across to activpayroll as first the financial controller, where I spent about a year as financial controller there. And then we went on our first mergers and acquisition event where we bought a business in Malaysia called ProPay Partners. And at that point, I then moved into the sort of executive director of our Asia Pac business unit and working with our teams in Singapore, Australia, and Malaysia to really embed that acquisition and make sure it was a success. And then that we got this sort of success in terms of value creation of that acquisition as well. So I've been really fortunate to, one, get to travel with work, which is something I'm very passionate about. Love to travel, love to experience new cultures. And then from a work aspect, fortunate as well to have done a lot of finance transformation and interactions and really see what M&A means from a people aspect too.
Yeah, and that's going to be a really interesting bit that I think we'll draw out today, and a little bit of a teaser as to what we've talked about as to other potential podcasts. That relationship between HR and finance teams, certainly an interesting one. And then we're going to chew the fat on the white paper that we produced earlier on this year at Lace Partners, which was Implementer to Influencer, redefining HR's role in business transformation. But we're going to focus on M&A today. But before we do that, I love my fundamentally different question. And so this is what I'm going to hit you with. And Andrew, you're going to go first, and then Shivani, and then I'll enlighten you guys. So I've just read an article about a Californian man who found a black bear in the crawl space of his house, and got me thinking, what animal would you prefer not to have in either a crawl space or your garage or any kind of attic or whatever it is? If there's one animal that you would rather not encounter in your house, what would it be?
I don't know if you've ever seen the movie or the program Last of Us on HBO, which was based on a game, but fundamentally it's these sort of cordyceps parasites which take control of the human brains. So since then, I've got a little bit of a fear of that. So I can imagine the crawl space being packed full of these parasitic worms or leeches or something like that, which attach themselves, which are maybe small in size. So that would be a crawl space thing that would definitely want to avoid.
That is a horrible one. That's made me shiver a little bit there. Shivani, what about you?
So I'm probably going to go back to my Australian roots because this has actually happened to me. So my childhood bedroom was upstairs and I had a little closet that clearly wasn't that much secluded from the roof. And I opened it one day to find a frog in there. So that's probably like a real life scenario that I would never want to re-witness. So I'd say frog.
A frog. Interesting. I've got one from last Christmas, actually, not the Wham song. I was in South Africa for Christmas, staying with the family or friends of family, and they were regaling me with stories about how in the garage next to the house, if you moved the garage door, occasionally you'd get a black widow spider that would fall down. So suffice to say, I didn't go anywhere near that garage in the week and a half that I was staying there. But yeah, that would certainly be my fear, going into part of your garage and something dropping down on you. Speaking of fears, M&A activity, this is my not awesome segue. M&A activity and the challenges that businesses face, and maybe even the fears that some businesses have with certain elements of, culture being impacted, integrations with technology. I want to get into all of that today. And I want to ask both of you some of these questions because, Shivani, obviously you've got a background from your kind of time at PwC pre-LACE as well, where you've done work around M&A activity. But let's start off. I'll start off with Andrew as our guest and then get your view, Shivani. I just want to kick off with a nice simple one, which is really around what are the kind of key considerations? What are the things that businesses, and again, draw on your own experiences here, what are the things that they need to think about before, during, and after M&A activity?
Yeah, so M&A is always something that people look for to add a huge value or to grow the market and grow the service into your market. But it's often looked at as almost like the silver bullet. But with M&A, there's just a huge amount of complexity. So before doing any sort of M&A deal, it's really having clarity on what that deal thesis is. So i.e., what are we actually buying? Or if you're selling as a divestiture, what are you selling? So that deal thesis and being really clear of what we're buying and why we're buying it is so important. And then there's also the validation of the financial baseline. So as a part of doing the acquisition, what do we hope to achieve financially as a result of that acquisition? The bit before, which we can talk about later on, is understanding the people aspect. So culture, leadership, capability that we're acquiring within that new operation that's being acquired. What is the operational maturity of the business being acquired as well? Does it require more investment from us, or does it actually give us an advantage in that area? So any sort of early thinking at the before stage around integration costs, synergies, and then the timing and execution of those synergies. So that's the really important aspects on the before. So really underpinning all of that is that deal thesis and why we're actually buying or selling, and then understanding the cultural and people aspects within that bit. So that's all really important at the before. When you're going through the actual M&A process, so the during section, which you called out, is what you're trying to look for is the quality of information. So you're then trying to say, this was the reason why we look to do an M&A, whether that's a new service line, that's a new market we're getting to. Then you're looking for quality of information, which then either supports that thesis or says, no, it's not quite right. And then the real kind of crucial bit during the bit is the communication with employees, because an acquisition can look really attractive on an Excel, but what does that translate into the people aspects? If there's rumors around acquisitions happening communicate with the people, silence of what's happening can then breed anxiety within the teams as well. So managing that process really slickly and speed of execution is crucial, so that there's not too much anxiety or fear that kind of disseminates across the organization. So the during is qualifying your thesis and managing the execution of the M&A really quickly, so you don't impact any of the organization right now negatively. And then if it does, it's making sure that the key communication with employees is done effectively. And then the after part of the M&A is the integration. So always with looking at either finance transformations or M&A, there's three kind of key areas. There's the people, systems, and processes. And I always say that integration, the first point of contact you make an acquiring business and an acquiree, is the people aspect. So that's the first real touch point between that, because that's where you're going to get that convergence of culture and how they work. If it's an acquisition which is cross-border or overseas, like what we did in Malaysia, then there's definitely a culture aspect you need to manage and maintain and understand as well. And what's really crucial in that early stage is the quick wins, so that you can demonstrate as operating in one team. So that's the real, that's the first integration activity, is formulating that first team. So that can be a team of individuals or one individual from one side to another that establish a kind of solid team to really work through what the activities are. And then in terms of the key activities in that timeline of integration, being really clear of what they are, and then demonstrating that we're executing against them. And if not, being clear why not, so that we ensure that there's not what you'd call like deal leakage or loss of value between that acquisition date and integration. Acquisitions are usually they can be intensive on your working capital, so your cash. So managing it really tightly ensures that good financial discipline, and it doesn't create deal value loss within that whole process. So I think that's the key themes from your before, during, after of an M&A decision. You probably noticed throughout all that whole period, all those three areas, there's a lot of interaction with people, key leadership, the wider organization, and then fundamentally during integration, the merger of what is a new team.
It's really interesting, Shivani. I'd love to get your view on this, because as Andrew was just talking about that different processes side, the thing that keeps popping into my head with this sort of stuff is always the complexity around the people part. So I guess my first question really will just draw on your kind of experience, and you can build on some of the stuff that Andrew's talked about as well. But do you think that people part is the most difficult, it is the most complex? And maybe I'll bounce that back to you. It's a bit of a binary question there, but Shivani, just want to get some thoughts on the things to be thinking of and the complexity around the people aspect of M&A.
It's a really interesting question, and I think Andrew positioned it really neatly, because you can look at M&A from multiple different angles, and there's obviously a very heavy financially kind of important lens that the people place on this. And I think typically when we tend to work with clients, it's really helpful when they understand that people are a really important asset. But when you're not working with organizations that maybe aren't as experienced in this space, people typically tend to be a factor that might be deprioritized. So it's really refreshing to hear Andrew see that as one of the three critical things across people, process and system, because it absolutely is. And I think that's where you can start to see things fall down if you don't kind of address that from the start. And like Andrew said, the whole piece around anxiety that you're creating with people in your business who understand that change is upcoming but don't necessarily know what's happening if it's not communicated well is a really important thing. And I think what we also typically tend to find is, like Andrew said, the typical stages of a deal, so pre, during and post, there's different speeds at which you operate. So pre, you are trying to do that due diligence around what are the constructs around our people. There might be some more robust things around contract, compensation, benefits that you need to think about, but there's also really broader constructs too around culture, talent that you want to retain, and how do you start to think about them in really quick succession, because typically these deal scenarios happen quite fast. And so you've almost got to be able to deal with a bit of ambiguity or imperfection, if you will, where you are just trying to do the minimum viable product to get your people over the line and create as less anxiety as possible. But then when you're going through the deal stage and post the deal stage, when you can actually think a bit more strategically around what does this future cohesive organization design look like? What is the culture and the leadership traits that we want to take forward? How do we start to embed them into typical ways of working for our conjoined organization in the future? There's different stages that you've got to think about, but you've also got to be quite pragmatic with how fast the overarching cycle is going as well. So I think it's really refreshing to hear that it is at the top of people's agenda. It's something that sometimes we don't often see, so that's fantastic.
Yeah, and I wonder if again, I'm just hypothesizing here, but I'm just wondering if, because a lot of the stuff that you talked about there, like the culture, the embedded leadership values and things like that, because it's a lot of intangibles, as opposed to the other side of it, which you were talking about, Andrew, which is that the deal value and how do we maximize our efficiencies. A lot of that can be quantified through things like with systems. You can quantify, okay, we've got 2 systems here, we can harmonize them into one. And so therefore we make a cost saving there. That perhaps overlooking from a people perspective, a lot of it potentially is on the intangibles. But Andrew, from your perspective, I'm keen to get an idea and draw. I'd love you to draw. Let's focus on the people bit because of that complexity, and obviously because of what we do on the People Agenda podcast. But I'd love to get your view in terms of if you can go back in time, and it doesn't, not specifically with active payroll, perhaps even with clients that you worked with previously in your consulting days, going back in time in one of my favorite movies, Back to the Future. So let's choose a DeLorean. If you can go back in time and talk to yourself or talk to clients that you've worked with about, from a people perspective, what are the types of things that you might want to avoid, or even things that you've seen that have perhaps gone wrong, just to enlighten our listeners a little bit. Is there any things that you can pick out or any bits of advice that you could give to anybody?
Yeah, so definitely on the people aspect, it's that it doesn't matter if it's M&A or any sort of finance transformation or any business transformation. It's that engagement with people is so crucial. So it's communicating. So I think on some deals that I've worked on previously with the KPMG or prior to that, it was not working with the individuals and understanding that. It was taking it from a very financial aspect of, look, there's the client had went across to then try and integrate quickly with a view of getting cost synergies effectively. But fundamentally, they were reliant on people to deliver that. They were reliant on people in the organization to deliver transformation change. So they'd never engage with them in that kind of initial conception of that idea as well. So if I could go back, it would definitely be engaging with people really in detail so that they felt part of it and they were understanding what the journey ahead required. Because M&A and integration is probably a really kind of one of the biggest things a business can go through, especially the one that's being acquired. So at times when the acquiring business is in the habit of doing lots of acquisitions, that can be forgotten. And that's what I've seen in terms of clients I'd worked for at KPMG, where they were really highly acquisitive and they'd been down this path. They had forgotten that over a period of time, to engage with the people early on, to understand who were the key individuals to help them to get this transformation program to their people as well. So it's constant engagement at every level. And there's things that people won't even consider about as an acquisition, but unless you're engaging and communicating what the plans are, then you need to give that opportunity to digest it. So that would be my DeLorean moment, is go back and engage with people from the offset. And it's communicate, stressing that I think is so important, and ensuring that there's alignment across the organization is so crucial, because that's where I've seen deal value being lost so often, is that there's that lack of alignment there.
Yeah. And Shivani, obviously, please feel free to build on some of that as well. But I kind of want to link in an additional question to which, Andrew, then you can jump in as well. So 2 questions in one with your perspective, which is from clients that you've seen previously, what would you go back in time and say to them, you need to think about this? But the second question that I've got, which links to what Andrew was talking about with regards to engaging with the right people in the different business units, actually links to that CPO and the people function. And it's more around what you've seen previously in your career about when HR or the CPO is usually involved in that M&A process. Have there been businesses where they're involved right up at the front? Has there been times where they're only involved as the deal's done and we're about to tube a load of people across, so here you go and crack on? What's your kind of experience? So 2 questions in there, which was the back in time bit, and then the points in which HR gets involved in the process.
Yeah, and I've seen both sides of the spectrum, which is interesting and teaches you a lot of lessons around it. On one side, I have seen it where, exactly like you said, the deal has been done and everything's been agreed and whatever's happening is happening. And only then is HR or people brought into the conversation to say, we need to communicate this. But what you've already caused is a lot of angst around what is happening, because people obviously know that something is happening. They've got high levels of anxiety and uncertainty around what's going to happen to them, how they're going to work in the future and what that means. And I think what is a result of that is obviously a lack of motivation, lack of engagement. You lose a lot of your key talent who just aren't up for not being in the know around what is happening to them or being in control of their careers. So some really negative impact. And I guess it links to that point that Andrew made earlier. Whilst it's not a tangible asset, it is deal leakage in a sense, because if you are losing some of that critical talent, that knowledge around your key processes, how things operate to keep things going through times of uncertainty, there is absolutely lack of a reduction in value of that deal that as it stands. So that's one side of the coin. But I guess on the flip side, I've worked with clients almost in that kind of lead up, so the pre-deal phase, in a kind of business readiness phase. And we've thought about everything from a people, process and system perspective around what is going to be the impact on people, what do they need to know, what's the information that we need to get to them at certain points, and how are we going to deliver that. And I think, look, it's always going to be a high time of anxiety and a high time of uncertainty, but the more that you can communicate, like Andrew mentioned as well, the less that impact is going to be. And so I think more and more, even in broader kind of people or workforce transformation, we really are seeing HR and people leaders having a seat at the table much earlier on in the conversation. Because I think, to your point, that relationship between a CFO, a CPO and the CEO really sitting together as one and tackling these problems from financial people and the overarching organisation is how you do minimise that impact. Yeah, seeing both sides of the coins, but I think we are typically seeing a change in the market with HR and people having a seat at the table much earlier.
Yeah. Do you see that as well, Andrew? And have you seen that either with you guys at Active Payroll when you were doing your M&A activity, but again, prior to that as well, when you're working with clients?
M&A, as I say, it's a big transformation exercise, but fundamentally, whether it's M&A or rolling out AI or automation, fundamentally, you'll need people to deliver that. So they really need to be engaged in understanding the direction of what's happening and why, to do that really meaningful. So in terms of really successful deals that have done the M&A side, the ones that have been successful have predominantly really engaged with the people very well. So they've understood the environment and the culture that's been acquired in that M&A. They then are able to translate the vision of why they've acquired that and what does that mean to them. So then there's clarity on direction and there's clarity on alignment for that organization as well. So that's fundamentally what people are looking for, is direction of what the business is aiming towards and going. Is that a change from the current or what they were used to? And alignment. So how are they aligned as a business or a team or as an individual to help achieve that direction? And if that's really clear, then you'll get really high levels of engagement, which means that execution of integration activities is much more successful. Where you have lack of direction, lack of alignment, you then see execution on integration activities just not happen because there's not understanding of the reasons why, there's lack of motivation. So you don't have that same level of buy-in. So it's so crucial to have that really clear. And a business should understand that as well from the inception of the deal thesis. So back when they did the acquisition, there was a why. There was a why they did that acquisition, and understanding this is where we're going as an organization. This is the opportunity we see with this acquired business. And then it's articulating that in a way to the people that's there. As I say, it's the first point of contact. You always make only one first impression as well. So coming as the business that's acquiring another one, coming really clear with clarity demonstrates that there's control, there's strong leadership, and then it takes away any fears that they should have around, are they as good as our current organization? Can they deliver what we expect? And it starts to give them information and evidence that the acquiring business is competent and strong in what they're doing as well.
I really love that explanation. And what it's got me just thinking about as you were talking, and particularly when you were talking right at the beginning about that before, the during, the after process, I started to think about from the people perspective, how do you actually measure success? What are the types of metrics or what are the things that organizations look for to say, okay, this process from a people perspective, because as we talked about earlier, you can measure things like, oh, the cost of the business is this, and we think we're going to get economies through systems and processes like that. And I also talked about the people part being maybe a little bit more intangibles like culture and the leadership. But have you got any kind of bits of thoughts? I'll stick with you, Andrew, but then go to Shivani, because I'm interested in getting you both of your perspectives on how do you actually measure success? Like, how do you actually say from the people perspective, this is what we think the best looks like if everything works out for us?
So the people in the organization, they're fundamentally typically delivering a service. So there's a customer, there's an impact there as well. So it's having real clarity of what they're delivering for the customer. Can we measure that impact? Is there any deterioration or improvement? So if there's continuation of delivery of service, that would surmise that there's strong engagement, they understand there's not been any fall off in service. But then, of course, there's other ways to engage with that. So if there's like at activpayroll, we actively engage with our employees through sort of a ENPS survey. And there's real measures then to do that. And what I've seen some successful customers do and clients do before is that they have that ENPS almost levied for an acquisition point of view to make sure that any of that anxiety or fear or uncertainty as a result of the acquisition is then brought through in that NPS surveys early to allow to address it. And I think that's fundamentally a lag indicator on employee engagement. And I think then the lead indicator is generally through the performance of the business, because then if there's deterioration in the business or things that aren't happening, then the question is why. So why is that happening? And it's not because it's a system process. It's fundamentally going to be a people aspect. It's understanding who is the key individual that's responsible for that part of the business. And why do we see then a deterioration, or in maybe some cases, why do we see improvement? Maybe there's actually increased engagement. Maybe they're more excited around the acquisition and opportunities. So then you see an uptick in performance as well. So then it's really understanding, again, the business that's been acquired, what the key levers were within the organization, and then measuring that. And as I say, there'll always be a people aspect that's at the heart of these issues as well. And then it's being really clear who they are, what motivates them as well.
Yeah, love it. Shivani, any kind of thoughts on that in terms of how you measure success?
Yeah, again, it's quite a difficult one because of the intangibility around it. But I think, again, employee sentiment is really critical. And I think from what we hear when we're working with different clients, it's what's also most meaningful to employees. And I think a lot of the time it's at role modeling of behavior from the leadership down and being able to always aspire to what good looks like from within the organization itself. So I think through these times of change, that transparent communication, leadership being front and center, whether it's through different engagement channels, not just emails or newsletter blasts. It's like literally that kind of face-to-face time with employees, whether it's through drop-in sessions, Q&As, informal kind of sessions as and when you need. We found that typically results in higher engagement and employee sentiment. So I guess not a measure, but a mechanism to help drive that we've seen is really important.
Love it. We are basically on time, unfortunately. So what I wanted to do, just as a final wrap up, just from both of you, and I'll start with you, Andrew, if that's all right, is just to give our listeners any kind of final thoughts or bits that perhaps we might not have covered that you think might be worth people listening in who perhaps are even either going through the process of M&A from a people perspective at the moment, or have gone through it, and things that they might pick out that you want to just flag today.
Yeah, so I think there's a clear theme that M&A is successful when there's really clear engagement with our people. And fundamentally, the people are the custodians of the people is the HR CPO. So I would say that take one thing away from this is early engagement with the leaders of the people organization and how you're going to have a clear plan of how you're going to embed the culture you want as an organization. So I always kind of break it down to direction, alignment, and commitment. Can you be clear what the direction of the new business looks like, the acquired business? Can you articulate the alignment across the organization and the teams, again, within the new organization? And then how can you use existing teams and new people to help drive the commitment to do that? And if you're really clear on that direction, alignment, and commitment, then you'll invariably make a better chance of a really successful integration and execution and integration. And therefore, you'll maintain value, and therefore you can then get after those value creation levers, which you identified within that original thesis.
Love it. Shivani, just to wrap us up, any kind of final thoughts?
I think just being as, I guess, comprehensive around the people agenda as possible. Because again, I think people can immediately go to things like contracts, compensation, benefits, which also are obviously critical during this kind of deal cycle. But the more broader aspects around engagement, leadership, values, behavior, culture, performance, talent, all of that stuff is also really important. And yes, you might do that and think about them in different stages. But to Andrew's point, as long as you understand the comprehensive or holistic view from the start, and you know at what points you're going to start to engage or implement those, that's really critical. So you're not left with a kind of half-hearted people approach to M&A.
Brilliant. Okay. We are unfortunately out of time today. We've hit the 30-minute plus part on the podcast, but personally, I found this really interesting. I love looking at both the tangibles and the intangibles and the impact that these types of activities for businesses can have. And I think it's applicable regardless of whether you're a 10,000, 100,000 person business or if you're a 50 or 100 person business. These sort of acquisitions and activity, the fundamental principles, they remain in place. But for Andrew, thank you very much for your time today.
Oh, thank you, Chris, and thanks, Shivani, as well. It was really wonderful to engage on that as well. And just the final thoughts is myself personally as a CFO, I think it's so important to engage with CPO, HR on all activities, not just acquisitions, because it's them that have the pulse of the organization, the business, the sentiment, and the culture. And it's going to be the people that deliver change and growth, or whatever the company objective is. It's going to be delivered through people. So for me, that level of engagement is crucial.
Yeah, love it. And Shivani, thank you very much for your time today.
No, thank you. And thank you, Andrew, as well. It's great to have this conversation. So thanks for having us on, Chris.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for listening. Hopefully you found it as interesting and absorbing as I have. And if you have, then please feel free to give us a 5-star, all that sort of stuff you're supposed to do with podcasts. But from myself, from Andrew and Shivani, thank you very much for listening. And we're going to catch you next time on the People Agenda podcast. Bye-bye.